So Swingley 2005 again suggests that the stress-based cues that infants use to segment speech around 9 months usually or can arise from the initial words that infants extract by using statistical cues alone. And another example that this is the right sequence of events comes from a study by Thiessen and Saffran in 2007, and they found that at 7 months, English learners can infer from artificial language data with word final stress that words should end with stress. So recall that for English, the normal one that you would be learning is that words begin with stress. But what they did is give these kids, these 7-month-olds, data that suggests, oh, you know what, words in this language, this ambient language you're learning, end with stress. And they found out that indeed, at 7 months, 7-month-olds were like, great, thanks for giving me that seed set of words. Woohoo, I'm going to learn that words should end with stress, which is in fact the non-English lexical stress pattern. And so in particular, what was noticeable is that when they provided transitional probability cues, the statistical cues that infants rely on before they have stress-specific biases, they found that these 7-month-olds really were using that stress final bias cue that they had inferred from that artificial language data. So just to make this clear, these kids were given words like padu, topi, gubo, to be, right? Stress final proto-lexicon, very clearly separated so that they could tell, yeah, indeed, these are words, so to speak. But the interesting thing was that the transitional probabilities would have said, oh, you know what? You should stick a probability, word boundary where there is a low transitional probability. You should assume that a word is made up of something that has a high transitional probability between syllables. And so the interesting thing was this test case over here on the right bottom corner. So you have a word like dapu, which has a low internal transitional probability. So if you are relying on statistical cues, you should say, oh, that's not a word, right? But if you're relying on the stress bias that you learned from that stress final proto-lexicon, you're going to say that is a word. Versus pudo, right, which has a high transitional probability in the stream you heard, but it's stress initial, which goes against what that stress final proto-lexicon just told you. So if you are actively using the stress bias that you learned from a proto-lexicon that was provided to you, you're going to prefer dapu over pudo, right? And that's exactly what these 7-month-olds did. So again, as soon as they have something more reliable than statistical cues, something that seems to, predict very well what's going on in the language around them, like the stress cue of stress initial, or in this case, in this artificial language, stress final cues, they are more than happy to use that instead of relying on statistical cues like transitional probability.